Hello everyone. We are here together for video 7. So this chapter is called Goldilocks and the Two Canadians, and we're beginning on page 114 in case you're reading along in your own book. Just to recap, James and Sam we met in previous chapters, and they're both paratroopers, and they become really good friends. They were dropped out of an airplane, and they were dropped 7 miles from where they were supposed to be dropped. So they ended up joining C Company, which was not the original plan, and they are assisting in attacking the Nazis at Verville. And that is where we're starting off. They're researching and figuring out what to do. And so that's where we're going to begin. Goldilocks and the Two Canadians. From where James hid, he could see the German headquarters in Verville. It was located inside a fancy chateau on the edge of town. The large house was white with tall windows and a steep slate gray roof. 3 smaller buildings of white gray stone, miniature versions of the chateau, sat nestled up against its sides, like puppies sleeping around their mother. The house was at the far end of a long, paved driveway lined with trees. Much closer was a yellow brick gatehouse that would have easily passed for a mansion back in Winnipeg. Major McLeod signaled for James and Sam to go to the yellow gatehouse with the 2 other soldiers to check it out. The place was silent as a grave, and when James and Sam came through the front door, bring guns at the ready, they understood why. The gatehouse was being used as barracks, with every inch of space taken up by bunk beds. Every single one of the beds had recently been slept in, but was now empty. "Somebody's been sleeping in my bed, Papa Bear," Sam said. 96 somebodies, James said. There were 8 rooms and 6 double bunks to a room, and not one Goldilocks in the building. From a second-floor window, James and Sam could see the German defensive position. The Nazis were set up in a long trench at the other end of the lawn near the house. The trench was reinforced with dirt and concrete, as was a large bunker that might have been a command post. Machine gun bays stood along the length of the trench. James could even see some of the Germans' round gray helmets moving back and forth through a narrow slit in the front of the bunker. He huffed. Besides almost killing the Canadian paratroopers, the British bombing had evidently awakened the sleeping Germans and put them on the defensive. James and Sam shared a knowing look. A full frontal assault on the Nazis now would be a suicide mission. Luckily, Major McLeod seemed to agree. 96 empty beds means 96 enemy soldiers, Major said when they told him the news. That's almost 5 times more men than we have. We have to try to draw them out. Major McLeod arranged most of the soldiers as best he could behind a low wall and shallow ditch near the gatehouse facing the chateau. The small Canadian troop was now in a line parallel to the Germans, separated by the long, flat grass lawn. The major kept a small group that included James and Sam with him at the gatehouse. "All right, let's just hope they haven't seen us yet," the major said. Boom! The wooden gate that blocked the driveway exploded in a blizzard of splinters. No one was killed, but the explosion knocked everyone standing to the ground. "Good Lord, they've got a heavy gun," Major McLeod said. "And they've seen us," James added silently. The command post he'd seen, the one with the reinforced concrete bunker and the narrow slit in the front, that must be where the big gun lived. The Nazis in the trench began firing their rifles and machine guns, and the Canadians answered back with what they could from their hiding places. It was a full-on battle now. "Pass the word for the soldier with the Piot," the major said. "We tried to get a bead on the German's big gun from the second floor of the gatehouse. You and you," he nodded at James and Sam, "guard the downstairs doors." Major McLeod hurried upstairs with 3 other soldiers, including the corporal with the Piot. And while James and Sam took up a defensive position on either side of the first floor, moments later James heard the distinctive shunk of the British anti-tank weapon being fired from a second-floor window, and he took a peek outside. The Piot bomb landed with a boom, kicking up smoke and sod. but it fell too short to do any damage to the German gun or any of the Nazi soldiers in the trench. James cursed, but he knew the corporal with the Piat would be saying much worse right now as he hurried to reload and try again. Cracoon! The second floor of the gatehouse exploded, buckling the ceiling above James. He ducked and staggered outside where dust and debris were still settling. Broken glass and pieces of brick crunched under his boots. He looked up. The roof was still on the gatehouse, but the second floor was a smoking hole. The German gun had scored a direct hit on the building, but the same shell that destroyed the gate isn't nearly powerful enough to do that, James thought. Then he realized. The shell must have hit the corporal's extra Piat rounds. That's what caused the huge explosion. The corporal, the major. James hurried back inside, but Sam met him coming out. Don't, James. Sam shook his head. They're all dead. Reinforcements. 4 men killed in a single blast, and with them had gone their only heavy gun. James put a hand to the wall of the gatehouse and said a silent prayer for the major and the other men. If Day, the practice jumps in England, the anti-aircraft fire over the Channel, parachuting into France, the British bombing, each of them had been real and frightening in their ways. But the way Major McLeod and the others had been there 1 minute and then just obliterated the next chilled James to the bone. The thought that his life might end instantly, explosively, in the fraction of a second, scared to a stillness into him he knew would be with him the rest of his life. Sam put a hand on James's shoulder, and James nodded. James would be all right. He wanted to be anywhere but here in France, anywhere but fighting this war. But there was no way out but forward, no time to not be all right. Together, James and Sam abandoned the gatehouse and joined the other paratroopers shooting from the cover. A captain took over for the major, but there wasn't much to do besides snipe at the heads of German soldiers who sniped at the Canadians. Even the German big gun became useless. It was too big to target individuals and too small to destroy the Canadian defensive positions. It was a stalemate. Sam turned his back to the German defenses and leaned against the low stone wall, out of sight from the snipers. So I guess we just settle in until reinforcements come, Sam asked. Yeah, but whose reinforcements? Ours or theirs? James asked. They both knew the likely answer to that. There were far more Germans in Normandy right now than Allied soldiers. Hey, what's happening, fellows? Someone asked, and James and Sam both jumped. 2 Canadian paratroopers strolled out of the darkness, one with blonde hair and the other with red hair. Both were privates. The blonde soldier held a Bren gun by the barrel, carrying it backward over his shoulder. The redhead carried 2-inch mortar and at least 6 mortar bombs that James could see strapped to his web belt. Take care of the Gratz already? The blonde soldier asked. James and Sam grabbed the men by their belts and dragged them forcibly to the ground just as bullets tore through the air where they had been standing. Of the smaller fire, they heard the boom of the German big gun thrown in for good measure. The shell landed far down the road with a boom, taking out a tree. James caught his breath. If that big gun had hit the soldier with the mortar shells, the newcomers would have been evaporated, and James and Sam along with them. We haven't taken care of the Crouch yet, Sam said. Yeah, so I see, the blonde private readjusted his helmet. We're Bravo Company. We're totally lost, and then we heard the gunfire. That's how we knew where you were. But when it stopped a while back, we figured the fighting was over. Sounds like the Jerrys have a 75mm gun, said the redhead. We haven't had anything big enough to take it out, James said. He nodded toward the small metal tube the redhead carried. Think you can hit it from here with your mortar? The private took a peek over the wall and ducked back down just before a German bullet hit the top of the wall, kicking up the kind of mortar that held the rock walls together. Friendly, the private said. Yeah, they're regular Betty Boops, said James. The redhead soldier shook his head. A 2-inch shell's not going to do any good against that bunker they've got protecting it. It'll just tickle the top of it. James understood. Mortars worked by lobbing bombs at high arcs toward their targets. Mortars struck from behind, which didn't help much if the bunker was covered over with a thick concrete. The best part of the bunker was the slit in the front. The weakest part of the bunker was the slit in the front from the big gun that the big gun fired out of, which gave James an idea. "Okay, let me have that mortar and some bombs," James said. The redhead private looked confused. "Do you know how to aim a mortar?" "I don't need to," James said excitedly. He took the mortar and the bombs from the private. "Come on, Sam." Sam didn't ask where they were going. He followed along silently as James crawled away from the Canadian position, staying low in a shallow drainage ditch. The ditch took them to a line of trees on the far side of the chateau's front yard, where James had a clear line of sight to the gun emplacements. Bullets hadn't followed them, and the rifles weren't snapping at them now, so he hoped they hadn't been seen. Without a word, James prepared the mortar, and Sam unpacked the shells. James watched his friend for a moment, suddenly aware that the shells in Sam's hands were likely to do to some Germans what their big gun had done to Major McLeod and the others. James hated the thought of anyone dying that way, but this was war, and he had a job to do. Mortars were designed to be planted on the ground and then tilted and fired, but James had other plans. He found a small but sturdy-looking tree and held the mortar to it, aiming it almost horizontally at the slit in the German bunker. Sam smiled and nodded. To fire a mortar, you must drop a bomb into the tube, and gravity did the rest. The back end of the bomb would strike a pin at the bottom of the mortar's barrel, triggering an explosive charge that launched the mortar back up the tube and toward its target. Without gravity to activate the bomb, Sam was going to have to do it himself. James held the mortar steady, and Sam took the first of the bombs, slid it partway into the barrel of the mortar, nodded once, twice. On the third nod, they both turned their heads away, and Sam shoved the missile hard down the barrel. Boom! The mortar shell fired almost instantaneously, and a second later the front of the big gun's bunker exploded in a cloud of white dust. Yes, success! James almost couldn't believe it had worked. There was no time to rest on his laurels, though. James waved at Sam to keep the shells coming, and he aimed for one of the machine gun encampments. Poom, poom, poom. They got off 4 more rounds, for each of the machine guns, and 1 more for the big gun, then dove for the drainage ditch, expecting return fire. But nobody fired back. James heard a cheer go up from the direction of the yellow gatehouse, and he peeked out of the ditch to see a Nazi soldier waving a white flag from one of the bunkers. The Germans were surrendering. James stood up in wonder. He and Sam had done something that worked, something that had saved more of his comrades than being killed. He felt a tingle of, what was that feeling? Triumph? The last time he had felt that way was when he and the other students in Winnipeg had made Marvin Lennox back down. But this victory was so much greater than that one. Sam and James hurried to join their comrades as a captain accepted the Nazi surrender. There were only 43 German soldiers uninjured enough to surrender, but they still outnumbered the Canadians almost 2 to 1. When the German soldiers saw how few Canadians there were and how many more of them they were, they fumed at each other. James didn't have to understand German to know how angry they were to discover that they had surrendered to an inferior, less well-armed force. "Exceptional work, gentlemen," the Canadian captain told James and Sam. If we get out of this alive, I'm recommending you both for a commendation." "Excellent. Exceptional," James thought. The captain called me exceptional. He is going to recommend me for a commendation. James was stunned. It was the first time in his life he could remember anyone calling him anything but average. Maybe the army was a place where he could be more than he was back home. But what did that say about him? That he was average and forgettable as a civilian, but as a soldier he was exceptional and commendable? Was that the person he wanted to be? James knew he should be happy. His gambit had worked. They had beaten the Nazis, taken the chateau. But at what cost? And how did this help Canada? Why were they here? We counted 96 beds, the Canadian captain told the paratroopers. Unless we manage to kill or injure 51 Nazis, there may still be Germans inside the chateau who haven't surrendered. He dispatched 3 teams of 2 to search the first and second floor of the chateau as well as its basement. James and Sam were one of the teams. The captain assigned the first floor and second floor to the other 2 teams. James and Sam were assigned the basement. I wish I was average and forgettable again, James groused to himself. Okay. Wow. James definitely had shown a lot of just ingenuity to come up with that to help save the day. And I'm sure those German soldiers were very aggravated by the fact that they surrendered and they were the much bigger, well-armed force. But there's might. They showed might in small numbers, and they were able to trick the Nazis into surrendering, which is really interesting. So the next chapter is pretty long, so we're going to call this the end of video 7, and we'll start again on video 8. And when we begin video 8, we'll be starting with the chapter called Wind Day, and we will be on page 127. I hope you guys are enjoying this book. I really enjoy the way that Gratz writes his historical fiction. There's a lot of facts mixed in with his story, and I really find it interesting. I hope you do too. Alright guys, I'll see you for video 8. Bye!